In this video, I'll try and replicate that analog celluloid animation look all on After Effects. Nothing here is traditional, everything is digital, and I want to show you guys what I learned on the way. There are many reasons why people want to recreate this effect. Maybe they just want to recreate an aesthetic of that time, or maybe they want to make a hoax or a fake animated piece and tell people that it was made during that time, or you just want to try it out. Either way, it's up to you. But if you're going to recreate an aesthetic, make sure you do your research. Make sure you find animated pieces made during that time and study what made that aesthetic there. Hey guys, so for today we're actually going to recreate that celluloid look from animation before the digital age, before animation was composited using only digital programs. Now, for those of you who don't know, animation was done on paper and those drawings were then transferred onto plastic papers or plastic cells, and then these plastic cells were shot on top of a painting for the background using a real camera, so it's all analog. Now the irony here is that I'm actually going to recreate that look using After Effects, which is completely digital. Nothing here is traditional, but I want to give that traditional look. So I'm going to show you guys what I've done so far, and I want to talk about it. So you'll notice that there's a bit of flicker, and that's just to replicate the dust passing through the camera that affects the brightness. The paint on that cell causes the drop shadow, so you'll notice a subtle drop shadow. You'll notice that the background will sometimes shift around. That's just to replicate that imperfection. I had to remove the absolute whites, so if you notice, nothing is completely white. I had to turn on the highest value of brightness to a more darker one. And also, you'll notice that I muddied the colors a bit on the characters. Digital-wise, they look too clean and too vibrant, so using After Effects, I actually had to make it more muddy. You'll also notice that there's a bit of noise, imperfections with some mileage going on, and that's again to give it that analog, really emphasize that analog look. Anyways, let's get started. So I did the animation in TV Paint. For each character, it's each separate file, and I'm going to export each of these characters into a format that After Effects can read. And the safest one is usually an image sequence. Usually, depending on what program you use, they usually have a file and you go to export. So for this case, PNG, and in TV Paint, RGBA usually needs red, green, blue, alpha. When you're using a different program, make sure you can turn off background or turn it on. I have it off. Anything that's checkered means there's nothing there or it's see-through. So you select that and make sure you figure out what kind of file name you want. I already actually made a save file for it, so usually when you save it, it's going to label each frame in order. And we're going to do that with the other character actually, because I haven't done her yet. So I'm going to select her, export that, and I'm going to export her into character 2. And I'm just going to call her character 2 test. And I'm going to export that. So again, you can use any program you want. TV Paint was my choice for the animation, and also what's great about TV Paint is you get to use a pencil tool that already gives that grainy look on line work. But then again, any program you can choose, it'll work for this case. Just make sure you can export to a PNG sequence, and that's all I have to say. As for the background, here's something that I speed painted. Very basic, nothing too detailed. And that's totally fine, but what we need to do is export this into a format that, again, After Effects can read. And what's good about After Effects is that you can actually import a PSD, but just to make things easier and the file much more compressed and smaller, I would actually save it as a JPEG. Low quality because I'm not really concerned about the background quality in this case. So I'll just save it as church random. You're going to import this later on. Once you load up After Effects, you need to make a new composition. So go to Composition, New Composition, and I'm just going to work with a standard HD. Make sure the frame rate matches your animation, and for my case, it's 24. That's the standard for normal animation. Duration, 15 seconds is fine. You can always change it later on. Next, we need to import the files. So I'm going to import the animation first. And when you click on an image, be sure to have PNG sequence ticked on your PNG files. You'll notice that the frame rate of this animation is 30 frames per second, and you need to change that. To do that, you go to Interpret Footage, and you go to Main. And from here, you can set how many times it'll loop. I'm going to make it loop, let's say 5 times, or maybe let's say 20 times. And we're going to force it to 24 FPS, frames per second. We're going to do the same thing with the other character. We're going to import her. And we're going to also change her to 24. And then we're going to drop in our background. Import that. Now we have the files ready. So next we need to drop in our backgrounds and our character animation in this composition window. So I'm just going to drag it all in. Here's our background. I'm going to lock that for now, just lock it. I'm going to drop in our dancing characters and I'm going to just adjust them. I'm going to shrink them, resize them, make sure they fit accordingly, make sure the composition is to your liking. It's all up to you. And if we are to play it, oh, I just realized I forgot to actually make her loop a few times. The shorter character. So there we go. If it's not showing anything here, you need to add more loops. So if we're to preview it by pressing here, you'll notice it'll take a while. And if I just click it again, I can just preview what I have. For this purpose, I'm just going to work half resolution so things go faster. And if I play it, that's what it'll look like. Alright, I actually want to make the background pan while the girls are dancing. So I'm going to lock, and I have it here locked already, the characters. I'm going to unlock my background. I'm going to hit this little arrow, hit transform, and turn on the timer for our transform tool. And I'm just going to select whatever part in the timeline I want, and I'm just going to move it to the left. And what this will do is, if I were to play it, it's going to actually have the characters dancing with the background moving now. This is our animation. This is what we'll be working with, and I'm going to actually start adding all the effects now. Okay, so I actually want to move the characters too. So I'm going to lock my background, turn on the transformation position, turn on the switch for transform, and just move them accordingly. I want the girl to the right to move closer to the left, and the girl on the left to move closer to the right. Oh, whoops, it's locked. Turn on that, and then just shift them accordingly. And they should be somewhat moving subtly. So this is the actual animation we're going to work with. This is our footage. Now we're actually going to add all the effects that make this aesthetically celluloid looking. One of the easiest indications of seeing an animation that's celluloid is the drop shadow it leaves after it's being shot. So that's easy to do in After Effects. What you can do is select your character, right click it, go to layer styles and hit drop shadow, and you'll notice a tiny drop shadow appears. Now we can adjust it. We can actually make it more intense than usual. I can add more distance to it. I can add more distance to it. So we actually really show that. So I'm going to actually emphasize that a bit. I'm probably going to turn down the opacity a little because I think it is too much. I feel like if you were to size it up, it'll destroy that illusion. For now, let's just stick to that. Let's make it maybe 1 pixel of size. And we can easily transfer this effect to the girl. You just select the drop shadow, Control C, you copy, and you select your girl character to the left and paste it. And you'll notice it just drops there too. So if we were to play our animation, now the animation has a drop shadow. However, I do feel that the characters feel too clean, so we need to actually dirty them up. We need to make the drawings look more imperfect than they are right now. Alright, so our drawings are too crisp. So what we're going to do is, again, blurify some of these drawings. So I'm going to select one of the characters and we're going to pre-compose a layer, meaning that we create a new composition for the character alone. Leave all the attributes. This all looks good to me, except I'm going to change the name to character muddied up. And there are many ways you can muddy up the character, but I'm just going to show you guys a fast way to do it. Now, I'm going to change the background color to, let's say, something gray so I can see all the black outlines too. And what we're going to do is, again, make it more muddy looking. So I'm going to duplicate the character, turn on the transparency lock so when I move this around, it's stuck in her silhouette. I'm going to change it to color. And you'll notice that if I blur it, so if I go to effects, blur, fast blur, and turn it up, you'll notice that it makes it look more muddy. You can shift it around if you want to create more muddiness. So what color does is that it reads the color of the layer and overlays it on top of the character without adding any value or shade to it. It's just color. No saturation, nothing to do with tint and value. Alright, so if we go back to the main composition, now it looks a bit more dirty. We're going to do the same thing with the other character. We're going to pre-compose her. Character to muddy. And then we're going to duplicate her. You can just select the character and hit Ctrl D to duplicate her. We're going to do the same thing, set her mode to color, and then we're going to blur it. And if we blur it, it starts to look dirty. And lock the transparency. So when you go back, now they look more imperfect. So if we were to play it, it matches. Like, it gives off that feeling that paint is starting to bleed out of the cells. But it still feels a bit too clear. We're going to have to blur it up a bit, but not too much. And we're going to do it in subtle ways. This one's an easy solution. Select your character, go to effects, go to noise, and hit median. And once you hit median, set the radius to about 1. Or better yet, if you want, 2. Although it looks really blurry, if you go to full, if you set your quality preview to full, it actually looks pretty good, but I want that blurriness. So you're going to copy this effect. So select median, copy it, and paste it on the other character. Now they both look a bit more opaque in terms of their painterly look. So if you hit preview while the quality is on full, it's going to take longer because median usually takes a long time to render. So we play it. Now it's starting to look more like cell. In fact, this is actually pretty passable, but now we need to add some of those camera analog aesthetics to make it feel like it's shot in a real life situation. The thing with analog cameras is that dust will sometimes pass by the lens, and this will affect the light and the brightness of what the camera is actually shooting. So we're going to actually replicate that. We're going to go to Layer, hit New, and go to Solid, and we're going to select somewhat of a warm dark color. I'm going to set it to Overlay, and I'm going to change the opacity of that to, let's say, 10%. And then we're going to set keys on each of these from the beginning to the end, actually. So you just hit this little button and it'll create those keys. Hold Shift and click on each of those keys, and now we're going to open Wiggler. So it's actually here. Alright, so the frequency determines how frequent it is, and the magnitude determines how much it's going to affect what I have selected, or what the key is, what it's focusing on, which is the opacity. I'm going to set the magnitude to maybe 20, and I'm going to make this frequent, like maybe 8 times per second. And we're going to hit apply. And now it's going to create these little keyframes already. And if we were to play it, you'll notice that some of the light actually flickers a bit, turns off and off. It's very subtle, and I want to keep it subtle actually. So if I were to preview it, that's what we have so far. It's a bit overkill, I admit, but it's the basic idea of what I want to get across, which is that light can affect the camera look. The thing with the analog look compared to the digital look is that it's non-additive, meaning that it doesn't require light to actually create the image. And for that case, that means it can't be absolute white. There can't be an absolute brightness. So for that, because we're actually shooting on a ground surface in analog animation, so to replicate that, we need to make sure that the highest value isn't white or pure white. So you go to Layer, New, Adjustment Layer, and we're going to affect the curves. So go to Color Correction and go to Curves. And what we're going to do is pull this down so that the highest value is actually somewhat of a light gray. You can even alter these, so turn up the subtlety, turn up the intensity of some of the subtle colors. and now it's starting to look a bit more traditional. Alright, so there we have it. That is a more non-native look. We're nearly there, but I do feel like we need to sell that analog aesthetics even further. Now when it comes to shooting, cameras will often move sometimes, and sometimes the drawings will shift very subtly in each frame. So we're going to actually replicate that in fidelity. So we're going to go to layer, we're going to hit new, and we're going to create a null object. And this null object is actually going to go below the overlay and the adjustment layer. And we're going to parent everything to this null. So what we're going to do is select all our characters in the background and parent it to the null. So every time we move the null, it's going to move everything else. Now we're going to add that subtle movement to the null. And it's going to be the same thing on how we did the overlay, the light flicker. We're going to use a wiggler. Okay, so once we have our null selected, go to transform. So select the drop menu of null, go to transform and hit position. And create keys at the end and the beginning of your timeline, of your animation. Select those two, go to your wiggler window, and let's set the frequency to about 8. And we're going to change the magnitude to something really subtle, like 5. And let's see how it looks. That's probably a bit way too much. Honestly, we could go for a really low frequency, like 2, and a low magnitude, like 2. So when we play it, that's probably way too subtle. And it's all about playing around with it, see what fits best for your footage. But I don't want it to move smoothly. I actually want to give that weird snappiness to it. So what you could do is, while all your keys are selected, right click and toggle hold. So if you're familiar with Maya, it's kind of like setting it to step mode. It doesn't ease into the next pose or tween to the next pose, it just snaps to the next key. And if we were to preview it, you'll notice that there's a bit of snappiness to it. And that's just to replicate that imperfection. And if you do feel like you want to add some of that easing or some of those drawings actually just moving instead of snapping, feel free to do so. Like maybe change some of them to an ease, and then keep some of them in snap. So it makes it even more inconsistent. Alright, so when we play it, some drawings are going to snap, some drawings are going to move around. It's all good. We're going to have to edit this whole composition, so you can actually add this whole composition into a new composition. So I'm going to create a new composition. I'm going to call it master, and again, just make sure it's 1920 by 1080, frame rate matches, and hit OK. And you're actually just going to grab your first composition and just drop it in here. And now it's all in one layer. Here we can add noise, so let's add noise quickly. Let's add that grain. Make sure it's set to final output instead of preview, because preview only shows a part of it. If you set it to final output, it actually affects the whole image. Now you can set the grain to however you like, depending on your taste. Do you want the grain to have color? Do you want it to be monochromatic? It's all up to you and what best suits your needs. So if I preview a small portion of it, we can already get that graininess already. Let's add one final blur to the animation. So I would go back to blur, fast blur, and I would just set it to 1 pixel. So now it just has a more blurry look. Again, this is all optional. What I'm doing here is all optional, and it's all up to you. Do you think it'll help your animation? Do you think it'll help for the look you're going for? Do you want something that's more high def, or do you want something that feels like the camera is out of focus? The thing about the analog look is you might want to consider how inconsistent you want it to be or how imperfect you want it to be. Again, that's all up to you, and it depends on your aesthetic. Some people say it's too much, some people will say it's too little. It's all up to you. So I'm going to preview it. Now there's a bit of blur just to have that slight out of focus look. There's one last step I want to show you guys, which is that chromatic abbreviation. And again, this is all optional. The final stages at this point are optional. So what you can do is we're actually going to pre-compose again. There's one last step I want to show you guys, which is that chromatic abbreviation. And again, this is all optional. The final stages at this point are optional. So what you can do is we're actually going to pre-compose again. So we're going to create another composition, and let's call it the final master. And after we have the final master, you drop in your master. So this has the grain, this also has some of the blur, and now we're going to actually separate the channels. So pay attention, this part gets a bit tricky. So once you have your master selected, go to Effect, Channel, and Set Channels. And you're going to make a source to each of these. So I'm gonna turn all these off, and then blue's also off. Actually, let's leave blue on. So where is it? Blue, okay. Then we're gonna Control D, duplicate that, and now this blue will be off. Whoops, this blue is now, god damn it, this blue will now be off, and now this green will be on. So set it to the same color title, and then Control D that, and now turn that off and turn back the red. So if I select each of these layers, the green one has green on, the blue one has blue on, and the red one, the top one, has red on. So if you guys haven't caught on yet, I've set each layer to a channel of RGB. We're gonna select all of these and set it to add, and it looks back to normal. But look what happens if I shift the top layer. Now, if you see closely, it's creating that weird chromatic abbreviation. I'm gonna do the same thing with the other. I wouldn't overkill it. I would just set it off a bit. Actually, my eyes are starting to hurt just by doing this. But yeah, feel free to like shift it around as much as you want. So you have that weird chromatic abbreviation going on. So when you play it, and again, it's going to take a while to load, you're going to actually have more of that video quality to it. It's not exactly the VHS effect, not yet anyways, but it's just to further emphasize that chromatic, that lens, that bleeding light, that bleeding color effect going on every time anything is shot in film or tape. Anyways, we have our fake analog celluloid animation look. This is the end of the tutorial. I hope this helped a lot, and I really want to see what you guys come up with. If you guys render your own video or turn it into GIF, feel free to tag me on it. I'd love to see your take, and I'd love to see what you add onto it. Anyways, thanks so much. The following tutorial has a Plus Edition on Gumroad, which you can purchase on my Gumroad website. Buying the Plus Edition gives you an exclusive video only available through purchase that summarizes my process on how I animated the characters dancing and how I usually approach my workflow, such as roughing it out, cleanup, and then coloring. You'll also gain access to the After Effects projects files, the TV Paint character animation files, along with its PNG sequences. Speaking of PNG sequences, the package also provides handmade VHS and film grain overlays that you can use on your own projects. No extra charge, it's all yours after you buy it. If any of that interests you, I'll provide the link down below to the Gumroad page.